because unfortunately I see so many times that people are, confident that they're fine with financing just based on their, their income, their figures and whatnot. And they enter into a 1 month, so they sign December 1st to close on December 31st, thinking, okay, yeah, I'm going to be fine for financing.
Yeah.
And they don't get that process done in time, or there's an issue with their financing, there's something with their credit.
Welcome to Real Stories in Real Estate with your host, Denise Laframboise. Real people sharing real stories about their adventures in real estate.
Welcome to Real Stories in Real Estate. I'm your host, Nicolee Evans from laframboisemortgage.ca, and today we have Jason Lane with us, sharing advice about buying and selling properties, closing dates, and bridge financing. Jason is a real estate lawyer with Woitzik Polsinelli Law Office in Whitby. Welcome, Jason. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, my pleasure to be here. Thanks for the wonderful introduction.
Of course. So tell us a bit about yourself. How long have you been a lawyer for?
Well, I've been a lawyer since 2020, but before that, I also worked at the same office. I did my articling and my summary. So I've technically been working at this office and in real estate since 2018.
It's a long process to become a lawyer, especially with a specialty in real estate. And, we appreciate people taking time to do that because real estate transactions, I don't think they're as simple and straightforward as everyone seems to think. People often walk out there and like, I'm buying a house. And we're like, great, like, let's do some steps first. So talking about buying and selling, you said to me before we had the call, like it's really important with closing dates. So closing, often people want to bridge finance or close on the same day or have some time between. What do you see around like trying to close a transaction for buying and selling on the same day, Jason?
Yeah, and that's one thing that if I have the opportunity to do with a buyer is to advise on ahead of time, because there can be definitely some issues that arise with that, especially when you're buying and selling. So my advice typically is, if it can be avoided, to avoid buying and selling on the same day and to obtain bridge financing instead. And to be clear, that's when, of course, you're going to be buying a property, you're also selling, you get financing on the sale property so that you have the cash to close the purchase, and then your sale closes afterwards. And the reason that this is so valuable is that when you buy and sell on the same day, what has to happen, of course, is your sale has to close first so that you have the money to close the purchase. And that can create some problems. For one, of course, if the person buying your house just can't close on that day, well, now you can't close your purchase. And also what can happen is, that sale, both of those transactions, unless there's been specific amendments made to the agreements, they both have until 6 p.m. to close. So your sale might not close until 5:30, and then we have no physical way of giving the money to the purchase. Now you've sold your property.
Yep.
And you have not purchased one.
Where are you going to stay?
Yeah, exactly. And so, the best way to avoid having all of that stress is to simply get bridge financing.
Yeah.
There's of course a cost to that. But in my opinion, and based on the experiences that I've seen, it's well worth having, because of this.
I strongly agree with you. Like, trying to do two transactions on one day is infinitely challenging. And we've seen cases, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, Jason, where we've got kind of a chain of buy and sell, buying and sell. So sometimes it's not just those two transactions, like at the same time. Like, you may be selling to someone, but they're also selling their place. So there's multiple transactions in a row that could probably like trip everyone up. And again, if any of them close at 5:30, you're kind of in hot water at that point in time.
Yeah, those are the nightmares that keep me up at night.
Sorry.
Yeah, these chain, exactly like you say, where you have a big long chain of transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is that, well, okay, you've bought and sold on the same day, and ultimately, the person you're selling to, they don't close. Of course, that's not your fault, but the person you're buying from, from their perspective, they don't care that it's not your fault. You're the one in breach of contract of that purchase. And they have the complete right to, while in most cases there is an extension, we do typically work these situations out. If you don't close on that day, they have the full right to go relist, resell the property and refuse the transaction. And while you can ultimately, go and pursue the person buying your house and say, hey, this is your fault that this happened. It's a situation you just don't want to be in. Regardless of who's responsible, you don't want to have to deal with that.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, it might not be your fault, but to the person you're buying from, they don't care where the buck stops. It stops with you. So in those cases, have you seen situations where the sellers have been like, nope, we're done, and walk away? Or is it generally this something that you kind of anticipate and have contingency plans in place? Can you anticipate things not closing on time, or is the bridge financing contingency?
Well, yeah, the bridge financing is what secures that, so that, we know what that means is, of course, we know the purchase is going to close regardless of what happens with the sale. To elaborate on that, there's of course issues where, okay, you've bridged, you've successfully bought, and now you have a seller that, let's say you're going to sell a week later, that seller might still not close, but you've closed the purchase. So while you now can't pay back the bridge, and that's going to register as a mortgage on your existing property,
right?
You've closed the purchase. That's one less thing that you have to think about, and there may be something you need to do with that other transaction, which ultimately that buyer is going to be responsible for. But it's a lot less stress because you have the purchase, you have the new house you anticipate living in, and so that's why that's so valuable. But yeah, with any transaction that doesn't close, most of the time, an extension, there is a contingency plan where an extension is negotiated, and it does typically close on a later date. But yes, there are instances where a seller will say, you know what, no, I don't want to deal with you as a buyer anymore. I'm going to relist and resell the property, seize your deposit, and sue you for any damages.
It all sounds very dramatic and not what you want to be dealing with when you think you're going to move to a new home. You just mentioned deposits, and this actually came up in conversation that I was having recently in a networking group. When we're purchasing in Ontario, which is where I'm licensed, when people make an offer, they make a deposit as part of that offer. So it's written into the agreement of purchase and sale. And then that, again, my understanding is that deposit that they've put in that agreement, the agreement of purchase and sale, they're expected to provide that within 24 hours. Is that kind of the standard timing around that, or is it kind of open?
Yeah, well, so it does depend on the wording of the section, but yes, 99% of the time it's written as upon acceptance, which is taken to mean within 24 hours of the contract being executed.
And so like we are moving a little bit away from closing date here. We're more talking about on offer date. So on offer date, when someone's like, hey, I found this house, here's my agreement. It's all signed back and forth, buyer and seller, and this is my deposit. At that point in time, like if they haven't given the deposit, like, is that contract enforceable? Like, is that the contract?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, if it's a completely firm agreement. So if it's unconditional, there's no conditions. So you've agreed that, buyers and sellers have both agreed that the transaction is going to close on the completion date and everything is firm. Yes, that is a firm and binding agreement the moment it is executed as such.
It's not the deposit that's then.
No.
Okay, because that was something that had come up, and there's a lot of misconception around that.
Yeah, and that's a question that I get frequently about that, is asking, oh, we haven't given the deposit yet. Do we have to, fulfill the transaction? Yeah, the answer is yes. If you don't give the deposit or you don't complete the transaction, as a buyer, you are still in breach of contract. The contract was agreed to prior to that.
Yeah. So once everyone's signed things back and everyone's happy and they're like, yeah, this is bound, right? So this is a binding contract at that point in time.
Yeah, exactly. And so, if the seller, if the buyer doesn't want to give the deposit and the seller notes them in breach, that seller has the ability to pursue them for the deposit, and then any other damages that they incur after that. So let's say, they went and signed this agreement, the deposit was never paid. They have to go sell the property again, and they have to sell it for less.
Yeah.
They can go and sue that original buyer that breached, and they can sue them for the deposit as well as any damages.
Interesting. That's good to know. Thanks for clearing that up, because it is something that comes up at different points in conversation and with our real estate partners. So that's really good to have clarity around that. Moving back to closing day and to bridge financing. So just for clarity, when someone sets up bridge financing to close on a purchase, that financing is on the sale property, correct? Like, so the bridge is registered on the property to be sold, not on the new property?
It can vary, actually. So it depends on the lender. Some lenders will actually register the bridge over both properties.
Okay.
And others will actually not even require there to be a registration and just a declaration and acknowledgement signed. But ultimately, yeah, your obligations to the bank are that upon the sale of your existing property, so the property that you're selling, that bridge must be repaid.
And so that part of the transaction, just for clarity, happens on the property you're selling. So the bridge financing is paid off when that's sold. So any costs incurred for bridge financing get paid off by that. So bridge financing, it really is a bridge. Like, I know
yes,
that's
exactly. So yeah, so when you do the purchase, you just get all the money from the bridge that gets sent to your lawyer so that they can close the transaction. And that basically, what that's doing is it's bridging. It's fulfilling the amount that you would have gotten from the sale of your property, because of course you don't have that cash yet.
Yeah.
So you're getting, that bank is giving you that cash before you actually sell the property, and then they're going to ask for it back when you actually do sell the property.
Yeah, and
plus
when we're
interest, of course.
Yeah. And for us, when we're preparing bridge financing, like, we take these calculations very seriously, obviously, because the bridge financing has to be sufficient to cover the purchase. And one thing that's interesting, and we've seen at different points, is bridge financing being short, which is a completely other issue, and also another issue with closing. So I had a transaction myself before I was in the industry when my bridge financing was short. Luckily, we were able to scramble and speak with our lender and get it the sufficient amount. So we've had clients who say to us, no, this is too much. I don't need that much. This is my purchase price. To be clear, the bridge financing covers the rest of the purchase price as well as all the closing costs. So when you're doing bridge financing, Jason, back me up here. When we're doing bridge financing, it might look like more than you need to purchase that house, but it's for a reason.
Yes, and that's exactly right. And to elaborate on that, the closing costs and everything that's going to include, your land transfer tax, your legal fees, your title insurance, this title search fees. So these all have to be accounted for at the time we get the bridge advance, because you need those funds on the day of the closing of your purchase. And so that's when, as a customer, when you're talking to Nicolee or Denise, they're going to be advising you that you need this much, because there are the closing costs that have to be paid at that time. And yes, and like you say, that is an issue that we run into, or where clients are surprised that they need to bring in money, because there's been an underestimation of what the actual closing costs are. And that's why it's great when a mortgage broker and a lawyer can be on the same page and be in communication, because they can make clear what those closing costs are going to be, right?
And that's part of our process. Like, we always try to be really communicative with everyone on the team, because Jason, you're talking about these closing dates when everything's lining up. We want to make sure that communication is always open. So make sure that you're always working with a team that's communicating and all on the same page, because if issues arise, we need time to figure them out and to make sure those things are in place. So this is really great advice as well. Like, from our perspective, not all lenders offer bridge financing. So definitely make sure that you let whoever you're working with know that you're going to require bridge financing, because it's not an afterthought. It's definitely something in the process that Jason can advise
that should be exactly an outset question. If you're not closing on the same day, then that, needs to be the first things that,
Yeah, I think
but,
everyone should just sell first and buy later. Go live with a family member for a while. It's
yeah,
way easier from our
yeah,
perspective.
that works too. Yeah, that works too. If you can handle the family, then,
Oh, well, and who can some
do that.
days?
Yeah.
Honestly, was there anything else about buying and selling that you wanted to touch on? I know that we've covered, I kind of moved back and forth, and sorry for that. I did
Oh,
forewarn you
no
when I
worries at
jump
all.
around a
Yeah.
little bit when I talk. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, what I would also, I guess, want to give as advice for buyers, again, just at the outset of the whole process, when you're looking to buy a property, and this varies with the demands of the market, but what I always advise is that you do, if you're going to agree to buy a property, that you are absolutely certain of your financing. So most ideally, you have that condition, that agreement conditional upon financing. So you have some time to go, say to the bank or say to your mortgage broker, okay, this is the deal that I want to do. Can we get approved for financing for this?
yeah,
Because unfortunately, I see so many times that people are, confident that they're fine with financing just based on their, their income, their figures and whatnot. And they enter into a 1 month, so they sign December 1st to close on December 31st, thinking, okay, yeah, I'm going to be fine for financing.
yeah,
And they don't get that process done in time, or there's an issue with their financing, there's
yeah,
something with their credit. And or and then an appraisal doesn't end up being done until 3 days before, and then it gets
yeah,
appraised lower. So there's these issues that now you might ultimately be able to close, but we don't have the money for the day. And as we were talking about before, if you don't have the money on the day you agree to, that seller has the complete right to note you in breach, relist and resell, and sue you.
yeah,
Um, so it's so important to have the financing, because yes, if you're negotiating an extension, even though in most cases they will give you an extension, you're going to be paying, if they have a big mortgage or if they have a bridge, you're going to be paying for their interest on those. They're
yep,
probably going to want another deposit because they're worried you're not going to be able to close the transaction. And so that fine, and you're just going to be in a bunch of stress because you don't know if your financing is going to go through.
yeah.
So that's, again, along with not buying and selling on the same day, one of my number one pieces of advice is just be absolutely completely rock solid on the
Yeah.
financing, so you can close this transaction.
Yeah, and I appreciate that advice from my perspective as well,
Yeah.
because we're very, very good at what we do. We can move quickly, but why add the extra stress of having to
Definitely.
move super
Yeah.
quickly and pivot in short timelines when you should have a pre-approval and make sure that's up to date? Even for our pre-approvals, Jason, like we do a pre-approval of our clients. So we look at their income, we look at all their different pieces around their credit, around their down payment, whether it's coming from a sale or whether it's savings. But in addition to that, we have to make sure that lenders like the property. And that's something that oftentimes I think people forget, especially if you're purchasing something that's a little bit outside the norm, not a cookie cutter, subdivision home. Sometimes lenders, not all lenders like all those properties. We work with 58 different lenders, so we can find you one most of the time, but let's not narrow our options rather than looking at things with good time. And I think another point is that it's really good to work with a team, like with your real estate agent, with your mortgage professionals, with your lawyers. Get them all in contact, get them in contact early, because they are your team for buying, and having everyone communicating and openness of communication and clarity makes everything smoother for everyone. So
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and that's very important on my end as well. I completely agree. Is that it makes it easier for everyone involved, and specifically you as the client and the person
yeah.
buying. If you have a team that communicates behind you, a lot less is going to get missed, and that it's going to get done on time, right? So
Absolutely. So
yeah.
I think that's about it for today. Jason, if anyone wants to contact you about what we've discussed or about your business and have you on their team as their lawyer, where do we find you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, the firm name is Woitzik Polsinelli. We're in Whitby. It's 619 Brock Street South. It's just north of Brock and Burns, near the 401. My you can contact me directly. My direct line is 289-220-3241. And then the email is jason@durhamlawyer.ca. I'm sure there will be some text for that as well, but there's
Absolutely.
that's my information. I'm always happy to answer any questions and work with anyone to make sure they can get their new home or get rid of an old one. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today, Jason. And thank you for tuning into Real Stories in Real Estate podcast. You can check us out, this episode and other episodes on our website, laframboisemortgage.ca, or anywhere you consume your podcasts like Spotify, Apple, or iHeartRadio. Thank you for checking us out today.